I mean, queerness has so many different definitions, and if you have
Oh.
others that you wanted to explore, I think predominantly what I find when people talk about identifying as queer is usually something along the lines of they're not straight or heterosexual and or not cisgender. And then there's just, as you said, the umbrella term, but all that can encompass. And then I've even heard people that are both or one of those things that still employ the term queer to define their doing, their way of being, their way of acting. So I think the queerness of the word queer is its undefinability so often.
Yes. So what in your opinion does queerness invite us to think about?
I think queerness invites us, I think it calls us to think about the messiness, the unpredictability, the undefinability within life. And that can be that's something that is on the outskirts or even in the center, but still messing around with that center, like a worm in the middle of an apple. That queerness permeates so many aspects of life. I think it's often in productive but also limiting ways referred to in sort of a mode of gender expression or sexual expression. And it is those things and so much more. I know Thomas de France, who's a dance scholar, talks a lot about queerness as not necessarily other ways of being, but just ways of being and ways of doing and ways of making, that queerness is almost like inherently within so much in this world. And how that gets employed. So not necessarily as a necessarily countercultural or counter-dominant voice, but as someone's existence and way of doing that can exist outside of having to worry about all that cisgender heterosexual nonsense that continues perpetuated in the world.
See, my parents divorced when I was 5. So, and I stayed with my mother. I lived with my mother. So my mother, she was a flamenco dancer, of course, and I went to the tablao to watch her dance and everything. But she took me to the ballet. She took me to concerts. I took ballet classes when I was really small, and then I kept on and off taking ballet classes, and then some jazz. Goyo Montero, who was a very wonderful, wonderful teacher for me. So I was very open because I didn't start with flamenco. I didn't start taking flamenco classes. I started with ballet and other sort of, not contemporary, but other like little modern, little jazz. So I was very open to other musics, to other dance forms. I went to the United States when I was 11 with my mother. And then I think Baryshnikov was the one that had se había ido a Estados Unidos en ese momento. And he was like the big star. So we went to see The Turning Point, you know, the movie, and I saw it 12 times. You know, this was not a flamenco upbringing, you know, it was not. I wasn't, that's what I say in the article. I wasn't used to my family gatherings and in the baptism and the weddings and everything and singing and dancing. I didn't have that childhood. No, I didn't. And that in my body, you know, I cannot pretend that I'm a 100% real flamenco dancer like the traditional ones, because I didn't live that. I didn't have that experience. I had other experiences, and I don't regret them. I love I love my childhood and my teenage years and everything and what I learned there, because that, you know, I learned English when I was 11. So that has helped me so much. And it really gave me a very open-minded mindset to not feel guilty of anything because I wanted to dance differently or I liked other kinds of music. My mother taught me that art was art. Everything was art. You know, she was very different also. So it comes from there, I think. It comes from there. I've never really felt like the pure flamenco dancer. Never.
Sure.
I've always felt different, weird, queer. Really, very queer.
So queerness allows me, I would guess, in my artistic practice and in my life practice, an opportunity to just like mess with the structures. And I guess I'm using that word again, mess, and to rework some stuff. At the core of flamenco, that I think we are speaking about it in different ways right now, and I can't say anything I'm saying right now without mentioning the brilliant work of Fernando López Rodríguez, who's a brilliant scholar and dancer coming from Spain, that I'm translating his book into an English version right now. And as I'm reading through it and exposing myself to just so many different historical aspects of queerness in flamenco, to see everything that has been happening, has always been happening in the 19th century, in the early 20th century, is illuminating and fascinating. And then to look at the ways in which even these things that have always already been happening get subsumed into dominant culture, or hidden, or pushed to the side and marginalized, and in a very intentional effort to preserve whatever a purist or traditionalist narrative they want to perpetuate.
You talk about in your paper, which is actually, I think, from Michelle Hefner-Hayes' book, where she talks about, where you coin the phrase anti-guapa, and so, I mean, I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that, or
Yes, it was in an interview. She was interviewing me for the book, and I told her, you know, we should be, tenemos que ser anti-guapas. Anti-guapas meaning position ourselves against this, ¿cómo se dice? Esta obligación, this demand from outside to be beautiful. You know, because there's this obligación, I don't know the word, esta obligación de, no, you should look like this. You should look this way, your hair should be like this, your dress, your makeup, It's a construction. Sure. Es falso, es completamente falso. And it's sort of, I always say that there are two stereotypes of women in flamenco, which is the Roma stereotype and the non-Roma. The non-Roma is the Baroque, civilian, what you say, la feria, no? That kind of beauty, which is very digna, elegante, you know, like a queen, very Baroque, full of all these things. And there's the Roma stereotype, which is racial, very strong, and, you know, long hair, loose hair, sin moño, sin flores, very wild, because the hair, you know, has to, you know, is very important in Roma culture. And less Baroque, more essential, but still a very different femininity, because it's stronger, it's much more stronger, and a little masculine, I would say. But it's still a stereotype. It's still a certain coding, aesthetic coding for Roma, okay? Which belongs more to Roma flamenco. And I say, okay, and what's in the middle? I mean, there's this black and white, and I'm not any of this. And I want to express, the thing is that with that kind of, let's go to the non-Roma aesthetics. With this kind of dress and this kind of head and hair, I can only express certain very few emotions and situations. And in my life, you know, I have all this richness of emotions, like I said, doubt, duda, anxiety. How do you fear? How do you express that in traditional flamenco with this dress that weighs a ton and this hair that cannot move, you know, because you go with your moño and your flowers and they should move. They shouldn't fall, you know, you should look the same way when you start the dance than when you finish. Like inside dentro de una urna, inside a bubble. And we're not in a bubble, you know, women are not in a bubble. We suffer we have fears, we are fighting, we are, again, there's violence against us. And this stereotype of women, of course, there's no violence, no physical and obvious violence against her, because she is playing the role that she has to play. But when she goes out of that role, you know, hay una, ¿cómo diríamos? Hay una contestación.
If there is something that maybe connects, and hearing your story, if we look for sort of connecting or connectors between our narratives as sort of gay men across different cultural contexts, on 3 different continents, or what we call continents on this world, that's something that seems to be a through line, at least for me, in hearing that and knowing a little bit about Fernando's trajectory, is this idea of, and it's interesting that you opened this up with sort of this definition of queerness and cisgender and heterosexual, that if those of us perhaps that have been born and identified as male at birth, or assigned male at birth, and then grow up taking on these bodily habits, these ways of moving and gestures, and all that encompasses sort of navigating this world as somebody assigned as male, that a through line for our narratives, and not necessarily all gay male flamenco dancers by any means, but for many of us, this idea that at some point it starts to seem as though we are taking on or just expressing what feels naturally based on our observations and our perceptions in growing up, what are coded as traditionally feminine characteristics. And then you see this in a potentially really violent way at times, and other times it's maybe a little bit more passive. An institutional, familial, a cultural way of trying to excise those habits or those mannerisms out of our bodies. Or for lack of better words, like a policing of those very behaviors, and in an effort to control our expression and our bodies. And so I began to see during my training, I write about it in my article, one of the opening anecdotes of just this young girl when I first moved to Sevilla, and she just stands out there, and when I walk out and I hear her say, "Los chicos no hacen eso," boys don't do that, because I was dancing in a dress, that maybe it's unfair to sort of put this whole major anecdote of my life that I remember on this seemingly 6-year-old child, but what she said connects very much so to many male and female teachers in every moment, in every attempt to correct or to encourage a way that I was moving that went with or against normative ways of moving in flamenco. And that could be very simple, from an applause or an encouragement, because I separated my fingers as I did my floreo, or okay, it's cool that you know how to do that, but when you're gonna do it in performances, you really need to keep your fingers together. And in this moment, I'd be remiss to say, like, make no bones about it, I am aware of, and I'm sure there are others that I'm not aware of, a considerable or a remarkable number of moments that I have not gotten a gig, that I have not been hired for something, that I wasn't considered for an opportunity, by virtue of the fact that I danced in a slightly more traditionally coded as feminine style. And so it goes beyond, that's just the way he likes to move. It has ramifications and consequences in both my professional and personal life. I think just what you're bringing up, and what I believe Juan Carlos Lerida refers to as like flamenco ortodoxo, so orthodox flamenco. And with all due respect, I hear you. Again, the messiness of this, the conflict of one of my favorite performers is Carmen Ledesma, who's from Sevilla, and very, if we want to use the word traditional, or in how she dances, and I can't resist. I've tried, believe me, in my contemporary evolution, I guess, or just work, to like figure out, why am I attracted to this? Why am I really into it? But I can't resist what she does inside of me when I watch her perform live and on video. So there's something very real there in terms of a sensation, in terms of a feeling that she is able to tap into with me. But I mean, make no mistake that I think flamenco ortodoxo is intimately related to capitalism and to the diasporic nature of flamenco. And so what you and I are experiencing also, and I think what really any non-Spanish flamenco artist that has grown up in a different cultural and historical context has to offer to the flamenco world is this very rub of, I see what you're all doing in Spain, I see what you're accomplishing, I see the boundaries you're pushing, and yet that traditional stuff still exists in Spain, and that very same push and pull is occurring outside of Spain, but I think it's more severe. And so there are, I imagine maybe the same thing in Australia. I mean, the amount of opportunities to do something contemporary in terms of flamenco are few and far between, and they're usually self-started. I don't know a single festival that's like calling up people to put their real best contemporary foot forward with flamenco, because what they're trying to sell is that Carmen, that lady in the red dress, and that sensual nature, and the and that emotion, and all of those keywords that we know are associated with that Orthodox flamenco, that often most of the opportunities I found to maybe really express myself artistically in a way that feels more right for this moment in my life are in the contemporary dance, contemporary performance scenes.
Yeah.
And I still respond to the call to artists in the Los Angeles area for who wants to dance at this restaurant tablau gig next month. Send me your dates. And I get up there, and there's something, again, with my attraction to how Carmen dances and what she brings up for me, there's also something really liberating sometimes I feel about, God, tonight I'm just going to go into the tablau and I'm going to dance in alegrías. And it feels genuine. It feels happy. And I enjoy that 10-minute opportunity to just do what I know how to do and see a smile on people's faces. And I walk out, I collect my $100 and I go home. And that was that. So there's this, sometimes I feel like there's an unnecessary conflict between the Orthodox or the traditional and the contemporary of like, I at least in the US, like we got to let each other just also do what we want to do sometimes, while recognizing the tropes and the stereotypes that get reinstated by some of what we do, which we can probably talk about further, even in the queerness and how queerness reinstates really harmful ways of being.
I read some articles about this last Biennale, and it said that it was the Biennale of women because it had more women, more bailadoras dancing, more than a larger number than men, and because the subject of the shows was very feminist, because it was a little contemporary and it was not the typical flamenco festival show, you know, with singers and, you know. And I did some research and I said, oh my God. So this is what they think is feminism. Okay, this is what I think, which is, yes, having more bailadoras and bailadores. Okay, that's good. I mean, the programmers are very commercial because they know that women on stage now have more llamada, you know, the audience, the flamenco audience are more interested in what women are doing than what men are doing, because maybe these bailadoras are taking more risks. They are really doing different things. Olga Pericet, Rocío Molina, of course, pero también María Moreno, women that come from traditional flamenco are taking other choices, making other choices, like maybe not only the costumes, but also the kind of singers, the musicians, the staging is very different. So there are very small changes. But the thing is that if the director, for example, this time the director of the Biennale was a very modern minded man that I know. He was el representante de Israel Galván. So he sort of came from a different flamenco. So he did a different programación, very different. But still, okay, for me, feminism in flamenco is not having to prove that you are a different woman, that you're a contemporary bailaora, we would say. It means that you don't have to prove your choice, what you are choosing to do, that you don't have to prove that you are feminist.
Yeah.
You know, that is feminism in flamenco. So these women sort of have to fight for the choices that they made for these shows, taking big risks, but at the same time not knowing if they were going to be programmed after the Biennale. You know, because the circuit, maybe the Biennale is a little open, but the rest of the circuits, Jerez, for example, is not. The south of France, Arles, what's the other one? Mont-de-Marsan. All these festivals are not contemporary flamenco, you know, complete opposite. So for them, this is feminism, and it's like, why? It's so limited, you know, that the concept of a contemporary flamenco woman dancer is so limited to aesthetics. Like, okay, I change the costume and I change, maybe I don't do this, but I do, you know, very superficial choices and concepts. It's still a very traditional and patriarchal, but not patriarchal in a way of discriminating these women, not in that sense, but in the sense of really not understanding where they come from, not understanding why they do the things they do, you know, why they dance that way, why they take those choices, not really understanding what they want, you know, what do these women want when they do this kind of shows. Okay, agency for me means taking these choices, taking choices that come from what you say, from my reflections, from my life, you know, because it sort of looks like flamenco is in a museum, it's in a bubble, and it's not, you know, there's no more, like you say, there's no modern life, like we're not living here in this century, but we go back every time you do traditional flamenco, you go back like an ancient traditional, I don't know, very, very, ¿cómo se dice? Binary coding of gender, all that stuff. And like, we don't live in this, and in this century. And sort of tourists, you know, people, the tourists that go to Spain and go to the tablaos, they want that, okay? They want like this journey in time, you know, to a very, which is not really true, you know, that it existed. But anyway, this romanticized history, ancient history of Spain, they want that. So agency means bringing your life into your dance, bringing your current, in your life, everyday life, fears, doubts, anxiety, ¿cómo se dice? Machismo, you know. Dentro de la, inside Spanish society, there's a lot of violence towards women. There are women being killed, you know, every month they kill women in Spain, every month, you know, more than one, I mean, 10 or many. So bringing that and bringing the violence that's been exerted on your body as a woman bailaora, you know, as a flamenco bailaora, which is, for example, the costume. Some of the costumes of flamenco are very sexual, you know, they have this stereotype of you have to be this body, and if you're not this body, like, what are you? How do you dress? There are no dresses for that. You cannot wear, I mean, you can only wear pants in certain bailes, in certain palos, but not all the time. You cannot use certain clothing. You cannot be masculina. All that is violence, because it takes choices away from you. It takes, you know, you cannot choose what you, maybe I want to do, you know, something very masculine, very aggressive, and I can't, because I should be this type of woman, this type of feminine energy. So agency means doing whatever I want, you know, reflecting on it. Of course, not just like a crazy, you know, I do this, I do, no, reflecting on it, really making my choices because I want to say something about my life, about flamenco, about my dance, about my body, about being a woman, but making those choices and really, like I say in the paper, bringing consciousness. I think we're not, women in flamenco, we haven't been really conscious of what it meant to be a woman in flamenco. Like we did whatever we had to do to get work, to be in the circuit, you know, like, okay, I want to be in Biennale, so what do I have to do? How do I have to look? What kind of flamenco do I have to make? I've never been completely inside that because I've been very out all my career, but still I knew what I couldn't do. Okay, so agency means being conscious of this and really asking yourself, what do I have to say? What do I want to talk about? Do I want again to dance Soleá with the same message, saying the same thing that my mother and my grandmother and all these wonderful dancers of the past, which were wonderful, of course, but you know, maybe they didn't have anything to say, but I think we have things to say, my generation. And I want to say something else. Okay, I want to talk about queer women in flamenco.
Absolutely.
And I think we, you know, I want to talk about that because when I was with Maite, when I had a relationship with her for many years and we worked together also. And this was like, you know, it was no, like there were no lesbian in flamenco, never. And there were so many, but we never talked about that. And Fernando has opened the space to talk about this in his books. And this is very important. And Rocío also, she's never been inside the closet. She's always been open about her sexual, ¿cómo se dice? Elección, su elección sexual. But still, for men, it's more, I don't know what, but it's more acceptable inside flamenco. But for women, we're invisible.
Right.
Completely invisible. And Roma, mucho más, muchísimo más. Yeah. And I really, really want to, I don't know what, but say, you know, or make it present, hacerlo presente, que existe, y que it's also agency, you know, like dancing from that elección, desde ese sitio, is important. You know, I mean, we should talk about it till it becomes normalized. Because, you know, because la elección sexual is not something that you have to, you know, put in front because it's not, it's part of you. And I don't talk about my cats when I work. So why should I talk about my sexuality? I don't have to when it's normal, when it's normalized. But since it's not normalized, since it's something that's been used against me, like with Maite Martin, it's been used against her so much by the purists and against Rocío Molina. You know, it's I think it's unfair. It's not fair that they use it as a weapon against us when they're not doing it with men or well, they do it, really. I'm not being fair. They do it because with Manuel Liñán, they've also attacked him so much. Y Marco Vargas, they've also attacked him so much. So no, erase that. No, they use it against us, all of us. And it's been in flamenco always. Fernando talks about this in his book so much, like it was always there. In the República, it was more open, you know. Trans, gays, you know, everything was on stage because it was, you know, La República, it was left wing, so it was easier and more, ¿cómo se diría? Más, it was more present in society, okay? But after, with the war and Franco, it was pushed down and still we're very, ¿cómo se dice? Somos muy conservadores en España. I know it doesn't look like that from the outside. We're very, like, we look modern, but it's not. we're very, in the arts, we're very conservative. And Tremendita, all these artists are coming out as queer, but I know because I know them all. They didn't have an easy time doing it, you know. They have to fight, and still it's being used against them.
The queerness within flamenco, you look at like La Hija del Ciego, who was wearing, and Carmen Amaya and others who were wearing pants or traditionally coded as masculine garments in their day. And we're talking early, like late 19th, early 20th century.
Sure.
And what we call now drag, sort of that practice for men, was also occurring. It just got marginalized or isolated in a very different way. And so the ways in which each performer in my paper that I talk about, and the ones that go unnamed, approaches, and I use that word actually intentionally, you know, approaches the bata and the bata as this being, as this thing, and not as a garment that's just picked up and used, but as a garment that actually has an effect on ourselves, on each person as they approach fabric on the ground and put it on. It's going to do a different thing that I put on the bata sometimes, and no matter how masculine I try and dance, whatever that means, I can't say that I feel necessarily like a hot guy doing it, but when I put on a bata, there's something about me that just feels really beautiful, that feels full and whole. And for Lignan, for whatever my critiques have been, with the way he speaks about it, of in Viva, of when he puts that bata on and this exploration of his young self, of the young boy inside that was repressed and told certain things and expected to act in certain ways, that for Fabian, he's at the conservatory and he's gonna crawl into it and create this really grotesque, weird, disjointed image or you know, feeling. And then Fabian and David just approaching it in an entirely different way, with a pretty orthodox or traditional lyric that accompanies it. That I find that part fascinating, that you can have all of these people approach it with a different intention, and then that singular object is going to extract, or going back to the holding on to and letting go, is going to grab something out of you and show a different side to yourself and to an audience. And so that process of research, both my bodily research and my own practice, and then in the writing and the reading of it all, and even as I'm translating Fernando's work, really just getting into the sensations and the feelings of reading these newspaper clippings and these passages that Fernando is writing, of beyond a text on a page and beyond a choreography, of the way that these bodies are writing in space, what just to sit with those sensations and what's happening in that moment for them. Some of these more recent displays of queerness, of men dancing in the Bata de Cola, the way they're being advertised and portrayed is this, oh my goodness, this is so new, and they're groundbreaking and innovative. And it's like, guys have been doing this actually for like 15, I don't have the exact number, but like 15, 20 years prior to this, and have been studying with it and taking classes with it and engaging with Bata de Cola. And so the men that I focused on, all engaged with the bata in a different way. I did learn it in a very technical fashion. I've struggled with it in my artistic explorations at times, of I learned this paseo, I learned this move, I learned this patada with it. And oh goodness, like I can't do that with the bata. Like that'll look ugly. That's weird. And at times I've had to really push myself, and what you're saying of letting go. Okay, what we might say traditionally would look ugly, is that actually what I need in this moment for whatever piece I'm doing? And sometimes also just throwing all of that stuff we know out. What would it feel like to get messy and just get lost and actively try and do something that's not the way we've been taught it, which in a way then holds on to that frame of reference still as something you're intentionally trying not to do. I say this not, ironically. I don't know if there's a way to fully get rid of it. That this idea of moving through it and metabolizing it and digesting what has been trained within and onto our bodies, that especially in a dominant way of working or a dominant institutional form of artistic practice, it's one of the few ways to get through it as maybe a cisgender man, trying to figure out what else is possible, what exists out there.
Does the vulnerability walk together with the courage for it to be a good flamenco? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, how do you feel about that?
You've talked about technique, and that's a very important point. And because you can approach it from both sides. One would be like, what do I want to say? And the other would be, how do I want to move? Okay, what's the coding of my movement? And the thing is that only lately, of course, with Israel Galvan, long ago, because it started being different very long ago. The coding, for example, I mean, the positions of flamenco are set. The arm work, the gaze, for example, the way you look to the audience or to the musicians, the way your presence towards the musicians, that's set.
Yes.
That's very, and those are the first things that you learn when you go to a school and they teach you, chest up, the arm high, the elbow, no sé qué. Your look has to be fierce, like you're angry because you're powerful. You don't know how many times to my students I tell them, please don't look like that. You don't have to be angry with anybody. Just relax your eyes, relax your face. This thing here in the middle, like, no, relax. I start from there with, of course, beginners, because later on people take all this tics, all these habits. They take all these habits and they think that is flamenco, and they reproduce all these positions, the gaze, and they think that is flamenco, and that is not flamenco. That's only the outer shell, the coding. So to break that coding, Israel broke it, Rocío is breaking it all the time. So so where do you start? You break the coding and then you are vulnerable, or you want to say that you're vulnerable, so you come from your emotions and you find the coding afterwards. So what do you do first? And I've tried to do both. So like finding different arms, different positions, different, as a woman, for example, not using the hips, not using the hands, like dancing without hands, without this. Like breaking the coding and seeing if that will help me reach a place of vulnerability. That's one thing. And the other thing is just, feeling vulnerable and coming from a very deep emotion of vulnerability, and then finding, how do I want to move? So you have to come from different places because it's new. It's a new flamenco. And this is what I really want to say. These people are really revolutionary. They see like a faraway country, like a faraway land, and they want to get there, like this, like Colón, Christopher Columbus and all these people. They knew it was there. They didn't know how they were going to get there, but they knew it was there and they believed in that. And these people, Israel, Rocío, all of them are like revolutionary people, because they really didn't know how they would break the flamenco coding, but they did. And they created something completely different.
So it creates new form in a sense.
But also create new form, but also create new expression, not only the form, but also, like you said, the emotion, vulnerability.
Yeah.
Now we know how vulnerability looks in flamenco because of Rocío.
I did Juan Carlos's workshop, and it was mind-opening and just mind-altering in a way. And I worked really hard in my debrief after that to not let go of, to not forget some of the more traditional things, and I put those in heavy quotes, that I had learned, because when I was with very same Carmen, she had us close our eyes and listen to the music and enter where we thought was the most appropriate point. Now, what you're getting at a little bit around like intention and process were certainly different, but the exercise in and of itself between somebody that's considered pretty traditional and somebody that's considered really contemporary and experimental, and I hesitate to even use the word contemporary. They're both here and now and in the contemporary, you know, but with the limits that he pushes, that it's helped me consider a little bit of what's the experimental and the traditional, and what's the traditional and the experimental, and how are those weaving back and forth.
There's all the time this positioning yourself in a different space, in a different programming, in a different, you know, small venues with small audiences, because the Bienal is never going to program Fernando and me. You know, we have several dance talks, and of course, Jerez, Bienal, they will never, because they're not interested in the message. They're not interested in what we want to say. They just want to see the problem. Well, one of the problems in this is that underneath all this is that the programmers and the audience, they just want dance. Okay, I heard this once in a Bienal, like, pero yo he venido a ver bailar. Like, I came to see dancing. I don't came to see un discurso, you know, or a concept, or no. I just want to see good flamenco, good dancing, good singing, and, you know, stop there. I don't want anything else. So when you put some concepts or ideas, and when you make the audience think a little bit, like question, not very much, but you put some questions like, why do I have to move this way? Why do I have to have this coding of movement or this coding of costuming? And let's change it a little bit. In general, Spanish audiences don't want that. In the South, they don't want that. They want to see good flamenco, and for them, good flamenco is tradition. But you know, that people won't like it, it's normal. I mean, you cannot, not everybody can love you, and the critics, you know, the reviews, of course, sometimes you get good, sometimes you get bad reviews. That's not the problem. The problem is that the programmers, the thing here, the problem is the people that control the festivals, all this, they have to be more open-minded. They really have to, but they're afraid of people, of the audience either not coming to the theater, okay, and they're afraid that the ayuntamientos won't give them the money, because the thing is that these festivals are not private, you know, they're not, the money comes from the Agencia del Flamenco, Ayuntamiento de Sevilla, or Ayuntamiento de Jerez. See, another problem is that the government, the institutions are programming, you know, they put money into these festivals, and maybe, I don't know what percentage, but I think almost all of in Jerez, for example, I don't know, 80%, a lot of the money comes from the institutions. So what they want is good reviews. They want the festival to be a success of critics and audience. And if the venue is empty because the audience doesn't, you know, they're not interested in this kind of flamenco, it's a flaw, you know, es un fracaso el festival. Yes, I think that's the next revolution in flamenco, the teaching of flamenco. That's the next, that's what I'm in right now, because I've stopped being in the big circuits. I don't want to be there anymore. and I don't have a company anymore. So I don't want to repeat what was being pushed in me, like you have to be this kind of woman, you have to look like this, you have to no. So I'll give a different space to my students, and that's what I do. I tell them, okay, to be flamenco, you don't have to be Roma, you don't have to be Spanish, you don't have to have your hair like this, black, you don't have to look like nothing, you know, nothing. To be flamenco, you just have to love it and to work like a dog. That's all you have to do. That's all. Love it. Of course, spend some time in Spain, you know, learn the culture, learn the history, get involved into what flamenco is, not only the class, but everything else. But you don't have to look, you don't have to be Spanish or even look Spanish. And the next thing that I do is, okay, I start the class with what you said, consciousness of your body. Take a breath, feel your body, feel your chest, feel your feet, feel the top of your head. Like, I have a very holistic approach because I love this kind of therapies well, I'm a therapist myself. I'm learning dance for Parkinson, and I'm a dance therapist also. So I've learned all these techniques in the past, 5 years, that really involve your body, because how can you start dancing if you don't even, what you said, if you don't even feel your body?
I think something that I offer when I've given classes or when I speak to people, and predominantly people that are maybe beginners or don't know a lot about flamenco, is I really try and invite them to be intentional about their spectatorship and their viewing and their participation in the artistic engagement with a flamenco performer. And so to not actually watch it up there and think that's this traditional thing, whether it's contemporary and experimental or not, because even we get trapped as experimental artists sometimes in, they've got this reference in the back of their mind always that we're working against, to let it be what it is in that moment, and sit with what it's bringing up for you, whether that is, wow, that's so fiery and passionate, or whether that is some complex emotion that feels really current and present to that performer in that moment. And I'd invite us, even in the LGBTQ plus community, to then think about, outside of flamenco, how are we being queer in the present moment, and not trying to rely on something that got us here, and not trying to fixate on some future that is out of our grasp, that we can't grab necessarily, or something that we need to hold on to, and to listen to what feels right and what feels needed by us in the community in the moment that we're in.
I understand that flamenco brings emotions and power, okay, to women, a powerful embodiment, a powerful way to express, for example, anger and sensuality and joy. I mean, it's very direct in that way. And some women need, talking about women, they need this kind of dance form to express all these things that are very basic in flamenco. And when they arrive in flamenco, they are so grateful, because it gives them the space to be sensual or to be rageful, I mean, angry, whatever. But that's one stage in flamenco, okay? You cannot stay there all your life. I mean, you start with flamenco and you go through, as a student, you begin like that, you begin copying and repeating what the teacher says, and this, with this phase that we were talking about. So you like cumples todas las etapas. You go all through all the stages, and through the stage of wanting to look like a Spanish woman, and all the stages. But then you have to evolve. And I know all the students that are maybe dancing flamenco for 30 years and they're still there. No, flamenco is much more rich than that. It's a very, like he said, very open, and open in the sense of reach. It's rich. So go, you know, ve más allá, go beyond those codings and open to a different flamenco because it exists. And for you, okay, you've expressed this, and now you can express things that are more subtle. For example, after the pandemic, okay, we all changed. We were so afraid, and we were so, you know, maybe losing our jobs and afraid of dying and afraid of getting sick, or maybe our family, they were dying, or maybe they were sick, and all these things, they can be in flamenco too, you know. They're very subtle and very difficult to express, but we can find a way to express other things. So if you're a student, don't stop there. That's the beginning, and you have to learn all those things first. But then you can go and open your mind to a different flamenco. I would say this to students in the United States or in Australia and Canada also. I've been teaching in Canada also. And maybe, you know, allow yourself to still be doing flamenco, but maybe with little things that are different. Try. And if you want to stay in the tradition, okay, it's okay. But, you know, there are more things.